8 people. 6 of them were children, all found dead in their own beds. An axe lay beside the headboard, and every mirror in the house was covered with cloth. In the quiet town of Villisca, Iowa, no one could comprehend how something so horrifying could happen in a place so peaceful. It happened on the night of June 9th, 1912. The Moore family, respected, kind, and loved by their neighbors, simply vanished into the silence of their own home. When the morning light touched the white wooden walls, everything was already over. But something remained, a fear that never faded, even after more than a century. Because in that house, something is still there. And sometimes, late at night, you can still hear footsteps in the hallway. Before we descend into the story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me uncover more places where the past still lingers in the dark. Now, let's return to the story. June 6th, 1912. The small town of Villisca, Iowa, lay wrapped in the calm of a summer evening. The air smelled of freshly cut grass. Neighbors sat on their porches. Children ran across lawns with lanterns, and no one could imagine that this peace would soon vanish forever. The Moore house stood quietly at the corner of a narrow street. A white wooden building with a tidy garden and the sound of laughter echoing through its walls. Josiah Moore was a well-known local businessman, respected and trusted by everyone. His wife, Sarah, cared for their 4 children: Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul. That evening, 2 guests had joined them, Ina and Lena Stillinger, sisters who'd stayed overnight after a church picnic. The house was filled with the warmth of an ordinary family night. The scent of supper lingered in the air. Fresh apples sat on the table, and the children's voices filled the home with joy. After evening prayers, Sarah turned down the lamp in the hallway. The clock in the living room struck 10. Outside, the air was still and warm. Only the faint breeze stirred the curtains. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of a wagon faded into the night. Then came silence. No one saw the figure that appeared outside the Moore home. It stood motionless in the shadows, waiting for the last light inside to fade. Minutes later, darkness swallowed the house. The town slept. Only the pale moon watched over Villisca. As the hands of the clock crept toward midnight, the figure moved. The front door opened without a sound, perhaps left unlocked, or perhaps forced by someone who knew the way. Inside, the faint smell of wood and candle wax lingered. Footsteps echoed softly on the wooden floor. Whoever was there, they moved with purpose, as if they had been inside before. Stopping by the children's room, the figure paused. Moonlight spilled through the curtain, brushing over the faces of the sleeping children. The stillness lasted only a moment. Then the silence was broken, and the night in Villisca would never be peaceful again. The first rays of sunlight touched the quiet town of Villisca. Birds sang on the rooftops. The wind stirred the grass, and everything looked just as it always did. For the rest of the town, it was an ordinary Monday morning. But for the White House on East 2nd Street, time had stopped. Across the road, the Moore's neighbor, Mary Peckham, noticed something strange. The curtains in the Moore house were still drawn. Usually, Sarah would already be outside tending to chores. The children would be playing in the yard, and Josiah would be preparing for work. Now, the silence felt wrong. At first, she thought they had overslept after the busy Sunday. But as the clock neared 8, her unease turned to fear. She walked to the porch and knocked on the front door. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. The door was locked, and there wasn't a sound inside. She tried peeking through the windows, but the curtains had been pinned shut from within. With every passing minute, her heart grew heavier. Something had happened. Mary hurried to call Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. He arrived within minutes, unlocked the front door with his spare key, and stepped inside. The air was thick and unmoving. A faint metallic smell lingered, sharp and sickly. Ross took a few hesitant steps forward and froze. On the bed in the guest room lay two small figures, covered neatly with sheets, dark stains spreading through the fabric. He stumbled backward, overcome with dread, then rushed outside, gasping for breath, calling for the town marshal, Henry Horton. Within minutes, people began gathering outside the house, whispering, speculating, afraid to imagine the truth. When the marshal and the doctor entered, even their experience could not prepare them for what they found. Every bed held death. Josiah and Sarah Moore, their 4 children, and the 2 Stillinger girls, 8 lives, all ended the same way. The axe, stained and heavy, lay near the bed. Every mirror in the house had been covered with cloth. The victims' faces were hidden beneath blankets, as if the killer could not bear to look at them. Even the windows had been darkened. Blood speckled the walls and ceiling, the marks of unimaginable violence. Outside, the crowd had grown. People stood motionless, whispering prayers, unable to believe what had happened in the heart of their peaceful town. The sun rose high above Villisca, but inside that house, the darkness would never leave again. The news of the tragedy spread through Villisca like wildfire. By noon, a silent crowd had gathered outside the White House on East 2nd Street. Parents held their children close. Others crossed themselves, whispering prayers, too afraid to look toward the house. The fear that began within those walls had already seeped through the streets, settling over the town like smoke after a fire. Marshal Henry Horton stood on the porch, trying to control the growing crowd, but even he couldn't hide the horror on his face. Inside, the air was heavy and unmoving, thick with the smell of iron and decay. Every corner told a story. Stains on the floor, overturned furniture, frozen moments of terror. The rooms that once echoed with laughter now held only the weight of death. The doctor who arrived moved slowly through the rooms, taking notes with trembling hands. Each body lay neatly covered by a blanket. Every room mirrored the next. The same grim order, the same silence. The victims hadn't stood a chance. The killer moved with calm precision, no signs of panic or haste. Nothing had been stolen. There were no footprints, no forced locks. It was clear. The only thing he came for was death itself. Perhaps the most unsettling detail was how disturbingly neat everything seemed. Despite the massacre, the house looked almost organized. On the kitchen table sat a piece of meat covered by a towel, a bowl of broken eggs beside it, and the stove was still faintly warm. Life had simply stopped mid-motion. When the doctor and Marshall stepped outside, their faces were pale and blank. The doctor's voice trembled as he whispered, "They all died instantly." Around them, the crowd fell into absolute silence. People searched each other's eyes for answers, but there were none to be found. Later that afternoon, a photographer arrived from a nearby town. He set up his camera across the street and captured the house, calm, quiet, and empty. Yet in those photographs, there was something deeper than tragedy, something that felt like a curse etched into the walls. By nightfall, Villisca had turned into a ghost town. No laughter, no noise. No one dared to stay outside after sunset. The town that had gone to sleep in peace had awakened in horror. 8 victims, one night, and not a single clue why. As night fell over Villisca, the Moore house stood silent under guard. No one was allowed inside anymore. Police officers lingered in the yard, cigarettes glowing faintly in the dark, avoiding the windows where the killer had left his mark. The house seemed to breathe. Every gust of wind made the old boards creak, and in those sounds, there was something almost alive, a quiet reminder that death still lingered within. The investigation began immediately. Detectives from neighboring counties arrived, followed by journalists, and soon the curious, ordinary townsfolk who wanted to glimpse the house where it happened. The streets filled with strangers. Everyone wanted answers, to hear something, to see something, anything. But with each passing day, the questions multiplied, and the answers faded further away. Police discovered the axe in the pantry, carefully wrapped in a cloth. There were no fingerprints on the handle, only dried blood on the blade. Nearby sat a bowl of water, as if someone had washed their hands after the killing. No one could explain how or when the murderer left the house. Every door was locked from the inside. The windows were shut tight. One thing was clear. Whoever it was, they knew the house well. There were suspects, a traveling preacher who'd been giving sermons nearby, a former employee of Josiah's, and a stranger spotted at the train station that night. Yet every lead dissolved into nothing. The killer vanished like smoke, leaving only fear in his wake. The newspapers called it Iowa's most brutal murder. People whispered of curses, demons, and possession, claiming no human alone could have done this. The house itself became a forbidden place. Even police avoided entering it after dark. Inside, it was cold, unnaturally cold, even in summer. The clock on the wall had stopped at the very hour the murders occurred, and no one dared to wind it again. Each day, Villisca sank deeper into its fear. Doors were locked before sunset. Families left town. Others avoided speaking the Moore name aloud. But even those who tried to forget knew the truth. There would be no peace. What happened that night wasn't just a crime. It was a shadow that would never lift from those who saw that house. Weeks passed after the tragedy, but the town could not recover. People avoided the Moore house, even in daylight. The police tape was long gone, yet the windows remained curtained and the doors stayed locked. It was as if the house itself didn't want anyone to enter. Even the grass around it seemed darker than on neighboring lawns. When the owner finally allowed a small group of investigators inside, they immediately felt a strange chill. The air was thick and heavy, carrying not just the scent of decay, but of something still. One of the men later claimed he heard someone whisper his name. He was alone in the room, surrounded by silence, and swore the voice was soft, female, but not human. When reporters developed their photographs, they found blurry smudges on the film, shadows shaped like faces. They appeared near the beds, in doorways, and in the mirror of the master bedroom. When the images were printed, a priest who examined them said they were not stains at all, but souls, trapped echoes of those whose lives had ended there. Locals began whispering about footsteps in the night, and sometimes faint children's laughter. A man passing by near midnight claimed he saw a shadow move from one window to another, as if someone were pacing through the rooms. But when he stepped closer, the figure vanished. The police stopped responding to calls. They already knew. Everyone who entered that house left changed. Not outwardly, but inside. In time, the tragedy attracted seekers, tourists, psychics, ghost hunters. They spent nights inside, placing recorders, filming everything. On their tapes, they captured whispers, thuds, and once, the faint crying of a child. One participant swore he saw a figure standing beside a bed. None of them ever returned. The house remained silent, but something inside was still awake. Something that didn't sleep. Something that remembered. And each time someone crossed the threshold, it stirred again, as if waiting for another soul to stay. More than a year had passed since the murders when a journalist from Des Moines decided to visit Villisca. His name was Henry Lawrence. He specialized in criminal investigations, but this time he was drawn by something beyond facts. He wanted to understand why, even after a year, fear in this town hadn't faded. It had only settled deeper, like a shadow that refused to lift. The house looked exactly as it had that morning. The windows coated in dust, the roof sagging, the broken panes whistling softly with the wind. When Henry crossed the threshold, the air inside felt thick and unmoving. Each step he took echoed strangely, dull, as if the floor swallowed the sound. He opened his notebook and began to write, though his hand trembled slightly. In the children's bedroom, he stopped. Where the small beds had once stood, faint imprints of legs still marked the floor. On the wall, a long scratch stretched downward, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. Henry took a photo, but the camera clicked twice, and only one image developed. In it, a soft blur hovered near the bed, almost in the shape of a child. When evening fell, he decided to stay until dark. From the outside, the house appeared lifeless, but inside, something shifted. The ceiling began to creak, and the smell of soot mixed with dampness. Henry checked his watch. 11:58. Then he heard it. A faint sound, like breathing, directly behind him. He turned sharply. No one was there. As he stepped toward the door, a whisper broke the silence. A child's voice, low and close, almost indistinguishable, yet piercingly clear. "Why did you come, mister?" Henry wrote the words in his notebook without realizing the clock on the wall had stopped again, at the exact same time as the night of the murders. Several weeks passed after the trip. Henry returned to Des Moines, but peace never followed him home. Each night, he heard the same footsteps echoing faintly across his apartment floor, even though he lived alone. In his dreams, a little girl stood by a window, staring directly at him, her lips moving soundlessly. He could never make out the words. The editor at the paper noticed the change in him. Henry's eyes had grown distant and tired. Sometimes he would pause mid-sentence, tilting his head slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. When asked if he was all right, he simply said, "There's something still there, and I have to finish it." A few days later, he drove back to Villisca. This time he brought no camera, no recorder, only his notebook and a small lantern. By the time he arrived, night had settled thick over the town. The silhouette of the house stood against the clouds, and the wind moved through the trees, whispering his name. The door opened with a groan, like it remembered him. The air inside was heavier now, thicker. Henry made his way to the same bedroom where he had stood before and placed the lantern on the floor. Its dim light barely reached the old beds when he noticed something different. The long scratch on the wall was gone. In its place was a dark stain, shaped unmistakably like a hand. Oh, he stepped closer, and something cracked beneath his shoe. Bending down, he froze. It was his own notebook, the one he was sure he'd left at home. The pages were warped with moisture, but on the last one, in thick black pencil, someone had written in shaky letters, "You came back." The lantern flickered. Then came a breath, soft and close, right beside his ear. And a child's laugh followed, quiet and cold enough to stop his heart. Then silence. Only the clock on the wall had moved, just long enough to stop again at the same hour. 11:58. That night, no one saw Henry alive again. When his car was found on the roadside near Villisca, the headlights were still on, the driver's door wide open. On the seat lay a single note. "I have to understand. The search lasted 2 days. Police and local volunteers combed the surrounding fields until they finally entered the familiar house. Inside was silence, thick and heavy, as if even sound refused to stay. In the living room, they found his lantern, shattered. On the floor lay his notebook, open to the final page. The writing was shaky, but clear enough to read. They never left. Upstairs, in the children's bedroom, the dust-covered floor bore small footprints, too small to belong to any adult. They circled the room, overlapping, then stopped abruptly near the wall. And there, in the corner, stood Henry. He was motionless, facing the wall, eyes open and unfocused. He was breathing, but unresponsive. When officers led him outside, he kept repeating the same words over and over. "They're here. They're still here." Days later, he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in Des Moines. He never spoke again. His fingers twitched constantly, as if tracing invisible letters in the air. According to the doctor, every night at exactly 11:58, Henry would wake up and stare at the corner of his room, the same way he was found. The nurses claimed they sometimes heard a faint child's laugh in the silence. The house in Villisca still stands today. Locals say that anyone who dares to enter after sunset will find their watch stopped at the same exact time, 11:58.